Thanks, Paige, and good evening, everyone joining us online and here. Thanks so much for choosing to be with us this evening. This is a really special evening because we're getting three things tonight. First of all, a performance that's going to last about 45 minutes, and then a Q&A with the artists, Oliver Husain and Kerstin Schroedinger, and followed by the pre-launch of their really fantastic new publication. We're the first ones to see it here. So we'll have a few of those available at the front after the talk. They're available to peruse and to purchase, and we can help you with that. And now a short preamble and an introduction and some brief acknowledgements. So tonight's lecture, Hypericin is a phytochemical produced by the flowering plant St. John's wort. The plant has been used medicinally in different cultures for centuries, primarily as an antidepressant. In this performance lecture, Oliver and Kerstin relate the flower to health, skin, light, and film by discussing their use of St. John's wort to hand process the 16mm film in their project DNCB, which is on view at Anderson Gallery, and the political scandal that shrouded Germany in 1996 at the height of the AIDS epidemic, when a study of Hypericin as a treatment for HIV received government support while other AIDS research and care were severely underfunded. Artist and filmmaker Oliver Husain is based in Toronto, Canada. Their projects often begin with a fragment of history, a rumor, a personal encounter, or a distant memory. They use a wide range of cinematic languages and visual pleasures, such as dance, puppetry, costumes, special effects, to animate the research and fold viewers into complex narrative setups. Recent solo exhibitions of their work have been held at Clages in Cologne, the Remai Modern in Saskatoon, Canada. Group exhibitions include Taking a Stand at Stamps Gallery in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and Immaterial Architecture at the Art Museum of the University of Toronto. Festival screenings include the Biennale in Berlin, the Biennale Berlin International Film Festival, Oberhausen Short Film Festival, Flaherty Seminar in New York, and Experimenta Festival in Bangalore. Kerstin Schroedinger's works in performance, film and video, and sound. Often collaborative, her historiographic practice questions the means of image production, historical linearities, and the ideological certainties of representation. She researches the coinciding history of industrialization and film. Her work have been screened at the Whitney Museum of American Art in New York, at the form expanded of the Biennale, of the Berlinale, the Berlin International Film Festival, Wavelengths in Toronto, MUMOC in Vienna, and exhibited at the 17th Istanbul Biennial, MIT List Visual Arts Center in Cambridge, Massachusetts, Photo Cairo No. 6, and the 2nd Kiev Biennial, amongst many other places. The publication that you will have a chance to see today was made possible through support by the Senate Department for Culture and Europe in Berlin. Our sincere thanks also to IFA, Germany, and the Canada Council for the Arts for supporting the artist's travel to Buffalo today. So without further ado, please join us. Thank you.
Thank you, Sylvie.
Thank you very much. Am I on? Yes. So we're doing a performance tonight. That means we are doing some things here on stage that you can follow us doing.
And we're not going to talk so much about the installation. We're going to talk a little bit about the installation, but we're going to talk a little bit more about research around the installation. So we're happy to talk more about the installation itself in the Q&A. And so the installation is called DNCB, and it's about a chemical substance. And tonight is about another substance. It's this one here. And you can see this flower. So this is St. John's wort. In the German name of it is Johanniskraut. You can see it there. And to start, we're going to make a tea.
Not very strong.
Not yet. Needs more.
But it smells funny. The following text is from the diaries of Blaine Ellswood, one of the first users of DNCB and founder of the Kamikaze Guerrilla Clinic in San Francisco.
Last Hours, the DNCB story, 1982 to 1985. This is when the real story begins. December 82. A young man diagnosed takes rope, hangs himself in the park. Did he pass my door in the night?
December 25th, 1982. Met Sherman and spent Christmas with him. A real orphan. Is inspired, but not too bright in a practical sense.
February 14, 1983, Valentine's Day. Sherman tells me his former lover had pneumonia. Finds out it's AIDS pneumonia. Sherman doesn't understand the connection. What with my other problems? OD'd in Marin County and spent 3 days in the intensive care unit and 2 weeks in the psych ward at Marin General, north of San Francisco.
March 1983, out and more determined to fight for health, mental and otherwise. Mole on stomach, growing back, venereal warts still a problem, facial warts flaring, strep throat, thought it was candida. UC clinic says it's not. Go to health fair at health center number 1. Get blood tested and line up to see the volunteer dermatologist. First meeting with Dr. L. Bruce Mills, who says, you should have that looked at. Me? Okay, can I make an appointment with you? Mills? No, I'm not here to build a practice. See some other doctor. But aren't you a doctor? I don't know any dermatologists. Can't I see you? Mills seemed embarrassed and upset. Won't give me his card. Strange, like it would be recruiting or something. The following Monday, I look his name up in the phone book and make an appointment anyhow.
Notes from meeting with Dr. Mills. There was a patient stomping out. Mills told him to stand on his head for bags under his eyes. He doesn't do cosmetic. Catch him smoking and blowing it out of the window. He then blows it in my face. And when I complain, outside of his mouth. He treats my warts with silver nitrate. Hot surgery. He tells me about DNCB. I tell him I want it. He says, no.
January 5th, 1985. My regular Saturday appointment. Mills says the DNCB results are very good, that Don seems overreactive to the DNCB, but his lesions are disappearing. I listened to this with vague unease, skeptically.
January 7th. I write to Steph about Mexican drugs, send a copy to Tommy, who gives it to a shanty friend, who supposedly photocopies it and distributes it to AIDS patients throughout the city. At any rate, the rush to Mexico and black marketeering begins.
January 8th. Blood test at Presby 1 month and 3 DNCB applications later. Mills wants not to paint me for a while to see what happens.
January 9, I'm telling Levine what I'm doing, or rather what Mills is doing to me. He says, he's doing what? It takes a while to settle him down. He's never heard of DNCB. Flippantly, I offer him an antidepressant.
January 19th. Mills says Don dropped out of DNCB and is doing interleukin with Dr. Wolberding. Mills tried discouraging him from doing it. Thinks interleukin will only spur his antibody attack. Yuck, yuck.
February 16. My usual appointment. I'm suffering from flu, asthma, and cold. Mills wants to talk about DNCB. He says Don is bedridden and covered once again in lesions, thanks to the interleukin. He says, referring to Wolperding, they're killing Don. I listen to his evident sincerity.
March 30th. Mills wants to paint me again, restarted, and scripts me for blood work at Presby. He says the results so far are real good with patients, including Don, who is back after a disastrous interleukin trial conducted by Wolberding. Clinically doing very well. I said, if this is so, he, Mills, should contact Wolberding and tell him, Mills, let Wolberding treat his patients and I'll treat mine. My blood runs cold.
April 3rd. Stop on my way to Levine's weekly appointment to have Presby take blood for DNCB restart. Dr. Haynes herself takes it. She looks like Louise Fletcher in Cuckoo's Nest. I ask her, is this stuff really helping Mills' AIDS patients? Dr. Haynes lets her hair down. Oh, it's amazing. One of the patients is in such remission. It's truly amazing. This confirmed everything Mills told me since January. You need to get Mills to help you write it up. Dr. Haynes. Oh, it's much too early for a full research paper. But Dr. Mills could write a letter to a medical journal about these patients' clinical improvements. I am thunderstruck because I know Dr. Mills has no intention of doing such. His privacy, you know. I leave Haynes in a frantic hurry to Levine's and tell him what she told me. His ears perk. What am I to do? I ask him. Can you call and urge Mills to write the letter? He shrugs his shoulders.
I had lost trains and bad sheep. Yeah, that's better. Not many T cells, man. Things. It couldn't hurt if mine. Well, it's scary to get it out. They're not even trying to work together. What do you say? They can produce these antibodies anymore. But I should lose. Scary in the mind. Hey, you. Stop picking on my immune system. Excuse me, but if you've been properly introduced.
So DNCB, dinitro, is short for dinitrochlorobenzene, and it's a photochemical compound. And it was used in analog film processing and photo processing in those labs, for example, at Kodak. But it was also repurposed into self-made medical AIDS treatment in the late 80s and early 90s, the time of the so-called AIDS crisis. So when Kerstin and I first came across an article on this, the uses of this substance, we were intrigued by the coincidental convergence of the histories of health, of queer politics and film. DNCB became for us like a lens through which to look at these histories, a tool for queering and challenging the prevailing narratives of film history and the history of medicine, a tool to question the dominant representations of healthy bodies and the authority of normal images, an attempt to blur the idea of skin as the natural boundary of the individual subjects, the borders or ends of the body. In our multi-screen installation, that's this one, that's on view at UB Anderson Gallery right now, we aim for moving images to become treated themselves, stimulated, emotional, porous.
From DNCB, the photochemical compound that became a substance to be employed as a treatment in alternative AIDS clinics around the USA and Canada in the 1980s, we looked at the wider context of self-organized alternative guerrilla treatment clinics. And we were also reconsidering the definitions of self-organization and of treatment, and what it had meant at the time of the AIDS crisis to challenge the way the pharmacomedical complex was increasingly monetized and capitalized.
From somewhere I got a bunch of these little DNCB models because they came in different strengths is what I remember. And so you were supposed to start with the strongest one or the weakest one, or you paint a little bit on your body or on your arm or on the side of your chest or wherever way to see if you got a reaction. And the idea was that you wanted to get a reaction because the reaction, an allergic reaction, is actually stimulating the immune system. Now, in retrospect, certainly getting an allergic reaction doesn't necessarily mean your immune system is going to identify a virus, right? But we didn't have any other options, and so it was try. And I remember I didn't get swatches on my body for a while, trying to went through the protocol, but the next time I went in to get my details done, in fact, it hadn't made really any difference, so I didn't continue with it. Stuff is pretty toxic, right? And cleaning out your body when you already had it. You're already kind of sick, it didn't make a whole lot of sense in the long run. Unless you go through the lever, then there's a bit of evidence that I can see that would warrant that.
And at the time, I don't think I was very knowledgeable about the kind of clinical trials you would need to really prove the value or the effectiveness or efficacy, if you will, not to mention potential safety issues related to using a chemical on your skin like DNCB. But we had so little to lose and so much to possibly gain that I think many of us pinned our hopes on some few studies that had been done looking at DNCB in humans and decided to risk it. But it really, really shows just how desperate we were at the time and ready to try anything and everything based on the most minimal of evidence.
I don't think I did anything around AIDS stuff until AIDS actually now started in February 87 and our first pre-public meeting was in 88. We started publishing and treatment news. AIDS had finally become available, but it was pretty soon on. That was helping very much at all. And so everybody was gasping around for anything else. And the major problem was you couldn't get non-approved drugs if they were really real drugs in Canada, because it was illegal to take things that hadn't been approved. We heard about people dying in states, but more available here. So we began to push for an opening up of not just the drug approval process, but our right to try non-approved drugs. And the idea was you didn't try these drugs that you're going to harm you and not be able to die. You know, this is, you know, perhaps something that's going to help you. People who are willing to take that kind of risk.
So this was an excerpt from the audio interviews we did with people living with HIV who had used DNCB back in the late 80s and early 90s on their own bodies. And so they told us about these experiences. And both Tim and Ron, who you just heard, they mentioned that DNCB was available to them from photographic labs directly. So it could be bought at Kodak, for example, like I mentioned. So for the 60mm film in our installation, we wanted to replace this toxic substance. DNCB is really poisonous. It's a very toxic stuff. So we wanted to replace it with like a non-toxic organic substance to process our films with that. And we started experimenting with recipes that a Berlin filmmaker had developed, and she's using all kinds of organic materials. Her name is Dagi Brunder, so she helped us a lot with her recipes. And we started to develop our 60mm films with turmeric. Turmeric is also a yellow plant, like DNCB is yellow, and it's a healing plant. And it worked, like the films looked fine. But then just while we were working at the lab in the evening, but just by chance, we met this doctor, Rainer Herrn, at a party, and we started talking about our project. And so he told us for the first time about Johanniskraut, so Hypericin. How do you say it? Hypericin. Hypericin. So Johanniskraut, Hypericin, St. John's wort. And we were so excited about the story that he told us because it seemed like the opposite of the DNCB story. So St. John's wort was used in Germany around the same time as DNCB in the US and Canada as an alternative treatment against AIDS. And yeah, we were just very excited about that. And we're going to share that story with you in the second part of this performance starting now. And we also started to develop our 60mm film with a recipe made with St. John's wort. So we used 1 liter of water, tap water is fine, 30 grams of St. John's wort pills, these, 10 grams of turmeric, just for the color, 15 grams of instant coffee, 16 grams of vitamin C, 54 grams of sodium carbonate. You have to dissolve all these in that very order. Then you dip the film into this mixture for 15 minutes, and you have to heat it up to exactly 20 to 21 degrees Celsius. Move the film gently. And then after the 15 minutes, take it out, water it briefly, and fix it using a conventional fixer.
So here you can see the result. This is the film that we developed with this developer. Natural substances like St. John's wort, of course, have a quite different history than a chemical substance like DNCB. And they often also have a cultural history. For example, the regional origin of the plant, its use, and how it was named. So when we got interested in St. John's wort, it kind of showed us the flip side to DNCB as a natural herbal remedy. The active component in St. John's wort is called Hypericin. The AIDS activist website and resource platform, thebody.com, features St. John's wort with the following words. St. John's wort is a mild and biological antidepressant, effective against insomnia and anxiety. Many people with HIV have used St. John's wort for these purposes. Hypericin is active against several viruses, including human papillomavirus, hepatitis B, and herpes. This antiviral activity has been shown in the laboratory and in animal studies, but not in human studies. The herb seems to work against viruses by oxidation. The herb's antiviral effect is stronger when exposed to light.
So there are some other interesting features about St. John's wort. It is a yellow flowering plant, but when the flower buds, not the flowers themselves, or seed pods are crushed, a reddish or purple liquid is produced, called St. John's blood. It flowers around St. John's feast day or midsummer 21st of June. Its antiviral effect is stronger when exposed to light. And when taken as a tea, herbal pills, or essence, St. John's wort enhances the sensitivity to light. Hypericin is a phototoxic. It is used in fluorescent diagnosis as an indicator for cancer cells. After the administration of the sensitizer, the patient is irradiated with a specific light spectrum, which is generated with the help of lights or a laser. This irradiation causes the sensitizer to react with oxygen, resulting in damage and death of the cancer cells. So in West Germany in the mid-90s, St. John's wort was used as an alternative treatment by a politically well-connected naturopath. The initial success of her methods were featured in a report on national television. We're going to play that for you.
Seit über 10 Jahren kämpft die Weltgemeinschaft der AIDS-Forscher gegen Vergebens. Weil die Schulmedizin bisher keine Lösung gefunden hat, steigen die Chancen der Ausbildung. Deswegen gilt Risiko. Sie ist weltweit einzige Medizinerin, AIDS-Infizierte seit Jahren mit einem Naturheilmittel behandelt, mit Hypericin, einem Extrakt aus dem bekannten Grund. Seit einem halben Jahr kann die Ergebnisse präsentieren, die selbst eine Schulmediziner war. Unkonventionelle Therapie. Hypericin ist eine Krankheit, mit dem Vertrieb von Naturheilmitteln kann man Geld verdienen, denn es wird schon seit Zeit und Kraftgeld als Heilmittel eingesetzt. Johannes Gott, das der ganze Personal und aus dem Labor der Bonner Universität Klinik Dr. Frank ist das ein Jahr neuer mit einem neuen Testverfahren durch die Hilfskonzepte von Angst und Beziehungsweise
Und dann ist Berlin tatsächlich die Idee, dass diese Gruppe 2,5 Jahre Inhalt haben, dass diese Schwierigkeit haben, untereinander seit Ende des Jahres. Das ist also schon mehr als
und deswegen sehe ich Fußball die Labor tätig. Das ist hier die Erfolgsbilanz der Therapie. Bei eigentlich auch Patienten kommt es zwischen 2 Monate keine Diagnostisierung danach. Bei 2 Patienten 6 Monate, bei 3 ein Jahr lang und bei 3 weiteren Jahren 2 Jahre. Dabei ist es nicht so viel, das Ganze sagt auch nicht die Effekte und Lebenswirkungen gibt es auch. Die Schulmediziner reagieren unterschiedlich. Therapie und Wiederaufbau. Für das Überkommen dieses Ergebnisse möglicherweise kann er weiter.
Zunächst mal auf digitalen Formen
Trotzdem war es positiv daran, dass Erfolge weit engagierte Ärztinnen und Ärzte notwendig sind, um die Wirksamkeit ihrer Therapie abzusichern. Aber das geht nicht so stark.
Ich möchte gerne etwas mehr wissen, dass es nicht nur so ist, sondern das Problem, das ich vorbereiten kann.
So this is the beginning of the St. John's Wort story in Western Germany in the mid-90s. And then follow-up on this was published in an article in a daily newspaper called Taz in February 1997, so almost 2 years later. And this revealed the backstory to this broadcast. I'm reading from this article now. St. John's Wort is supposed to calm and lighten the mood, but currently that little plant with a strong tannin content is causing unrest and gloomy faces. The reason for this excitement is a highly controversial study. The effectiveness of the herb is the treatment of AIDS is to be examined in a cohort of 500 infected people. Experts grab their heads. On February 6, the Bonn Ministry of Research received the application for funding for the project. For the Robert Koch Institute, for the German AIDS Hilfe, and for the doctors of the Clinical Working Group on AIDS, the project is money thrown out of the window. But contrary to the judgment of the experts, the study could still be launched for political reasons. Chancellor Helmut Kohl personally campaigned for the project. At a press conference in Bonn on Friday, the German AIDS Hilfe railed against the nonsensical research project. While the budget for AIDS education and prevention is shrinking by a third, where only 17 million marks are available for the entire AIDS research, a drug is to be examined at the cost of 5 million marks, whose ineffectiveness in HIV matters has long been proven.
The career of St. John's wort as an AIDS drug began 2 years ago with a spectacular TV program. In it, Dr. Anne Steinberg-Klose reported on unusual therapeutic success with HIV patients. Immediately afterwards, a rush to the naturopath clinic began. Meanwhile, in federal German politics, her husband and Parliament Vice President Hans-Ulrich Klose was campaigning for funds and support for his wife's research. Minister of Science, Seehofer, and Minister of Health, Rüttgers, were activated. And finally, even the Chancellor, Helmut Kohl, dealt with the matter personally, twice. The St. John's wort Coalition in Bonn finally agreed to launch a study. When the Robert Koch Institute scientifically processed the patient data from the Steinberg-Klose Clinic, St. John's wort euphoria tipped over. The scientists at Robert Koch Institute were able to see no therapeutic effect. They discovered that the plant's antiviral active ingredients, the hypericins, only work in vitro in combination with UV light. However, since it's pitch black inside the human body, the hypericin cannot do anything there against the AIDS virus.
AIDS movement for over 10 years was very, very into alternative therapies. And also developing a strong strain of anti-doctor, like your doctor doesn't always know the best. That's say appropriate mistrust of pharmaceuticals and doctors and the whole kind of medical, corporation in a sense, right? And I think that's like entirely appropriate. And I think people with HIV continue to bring that skepticism, maybe not so much anymore, but for a long time, people with HIV continue to bring that skepticism to the table. And I think it achieved things. And I think, that has its roots in a philosophy around alternative medicine. That wasn't pro alternatives or pro pharmaceutical. I just want people to be really healthy and really happy and and taking care of us, right? Everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. So maybe I wanted to quickly mention the references we had also here. The last person is also someone we interviewed in the framework of our research, and the first video extract that you saw was a film by John Grayson called
Patient Zero.
Patient Zero,
Yeah.
from the 1990s. Yeah, and the others we kind of mentioned during the talk.
Mm.
And the yellow movie, of course, is a reference to Tony Conrad.
So thank you. I don't think is this on? Yeah. So thank you so much. So I want to encourage folks to ask questions. If anybody has a question to begin with. Okay. Well, I guess I could start. Oh, there is one. Okay, great.
Hello. What was it exactly that led the community's distrust of corporate medicine at the time of the AIDS pandemic?
As far as I know, so there was not enough research being done, and the research that was being done was going too slowly. So so there was a lot of uncertainty, and because it was marginalized people mostly affected by the illness, they felt they were not taken serious. And
they had to like start to put pressure on politicians and on the pharma industry to even start that research. And so a lot of the people that we talked to, that they told us about how they had to become kind of doctors themselves. They had to kind of learn all this really complicated stuff about the immune system and about viruses and how they work, because, you know, science just didn't do it. And so that was one reason why they also didn't trust it. They knew they couldn't. Yeah. So it's kind of very different, like very different to even compared to the all the resources that were poured into the pandemic now, right? Like how governments and everybody was like on it. And just imagine that didn't happen, and so the patients had to like fight for all of this.
More questions from students?
Yeah.
Hi, I really enjoyed watching the video at the Anderson Galleries, and I'm sorry I was late, but what got you interested in this topic and in this way? Was that talked about earlier today?
Not really.
I think the interest came a bit from this kind of how the chemical itself changed its kind of purpose from being used in photography to being used as a medicinal treatment. So and that was actually at a time when analog photography was in decline. So it felt like this repurposing was actually also a kind of a sign of the times, basically, of changing from analog to more digital. But of course, this is a technical issue, and it just became very clear very soon when we started to look into it that there was a lot of urgency and desperation, maybe, and in this kind of self-organized treatment structures that were actually developed at that time by themselves. You know, that there was an activist community movement. So this was very intriguing, and we also thought that it's like such a side story of knowledgeable history, so no one knows about this, or no one talks about it much. So yeah, I think that was a drive in proceeding with finding out more about it.
And then when we learned more about it, we learned, for example, that DNCB wasn't used as a medicine, like people didn't take it into their bodies, but they painted it on their skin. And that's a lot of what our work at Anderson is about. You see these procedures of people painting like different colors on their skin, painting stuff on their skin. And so DNCB is so toxic that it, when you paint it on the skin, it creates some sort of allergic reaction. So the whole body reacts to it. And that had a positive effect for many AIDS patients at the time, up to a certain degree. So it's also never been studied, just like St. John's Well. So for us, this whole, like, it became more and more fascinating, this combination to film, but then also this idea to color, to skin, to light sensitivity. And you could also, of course, compare the surface of skin and the surface of film, right? And like thinking about light. So it all seemed to like be woven together in this really fascinating way.
Follow up on that. So is your background is your background coming at this like for people who are deep in film and photo history or making, or kind of more from the activist side, or maybe from both sides? Because I mean, yeah, my experience of the piece at the Anderson Gallery, and I didn't even understand the AIDS part at first. I just watched the front video, which was kind of brilliant because you could just read it in so many ways before you even got to the backstory. So just congratulations on that. But yeah, I mean, it just feels like real, like photo nerds, like somehow find this great story and did amazing things with it.
Totally, that's totally a part of it. The photo nerdiness, absolutely part of it. Especially Kerstin has done like other works about the chemical history of filmmaking and what, you know, other stories you can draw out of that are not film related.
Yeah. But I also think, I mean, that's why I think that's why I think we're both very happy that it's in the framework of this exhibition, because the exhibition itself gives it a context, a wider context, or wider way to relate to it.
And the video, yeah, you know, when you're doing like a research heavy work like that, it's also how to decide how to, like, where to put the information and how to, you know, how deep you want to go with this research. So we've always kind of done these kind of performance lectures or things around all our research, where we present it in a much more direct way than in the actual installation. And we find that it also opens up so many conversations. So this project has been with us for a really long time. So we started to do these interviews and the archival research already in 2017, 18. And we've been showing this research and the works that came out of it in very different ways, as like performances, as just screenings in cinemas, as something like this. We did it on Zoom and so on. And so we also learned that for the first time in our own practice, like showing something in so many also kind of unfinished ways is actually great, because it opens up conversations in a much better way than if you present like this perfect product where everything is, you know, the sound design and everything is like perfect, then often it just also shuts down the conversation. And because this project is so much about communities and about learning about these histories of communities, we were very excited to keep it in that way open, or to, like, for example, tonight was the first time we added this whole flower part, and, you know, to keep on growing it and kind of changing it over time.
Der Film war in Potsdam gemacht. You made the film in Potsdam?
No.
Okay. Ich hatte es sehr gern, liebe Berlin.
Labor Berlin. Yeah, that's in Berlin.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, we did this in Berlin.
The lab is in Berlin, but it's not Potsdam Studios. So we produced part of it in Toronto as well.
Thank you both. I was wondering if you could talk a bit about your working practice together as two people with separate art practices as well. What do you find especially generative or exciting about working with each other and working on projects together?
Yeah, it's a bit, it's not an obvious collaboration, I think. But I feel like it worked quite well. As Oliver said, it's going on for a while, and it's also to do because we don't live in the same continent and don't have, so it's not so, we don't have a regular practice. We have more like clusters where we meet, we have the chance to meet and work more intensively together, and then depart and do something else for a year or something like that.
And we met through a friend who introduced us, and I think that he saw, and we both admire this friend a lot, Ian White, and so he was a UK-based curator and filmmaker and performance artist, and kind of a little bit our mentor. And he introduced us and saw some combination there, and that kind of was also a reason why it worked out. It's like collaboration is a great way to do something, right? Like it always you have to be like, one thing I think you can be in a way more risk-taking because you're already like this little crew, even if it's a crew of 2 people, right? You're like a little band, and so you have another self-confidence than when you're doing something alone.
So,
yes.
So with the correlation and intersection you're drawing between film, photo, and medicine, I was just curious, the portions with the patients and the test patients being interviewed, was there a reason why there was no visual element there aside from the subtitles?
Yeah. We did interview these people. We actually filmed with video and some of it, and no, that's not true. No, no, we did it all as audio interviews because we thought so. We were also really careful and very. We wanted to be really respectful around this whole issue that we're talking about HIV, and we're both not positive, and we're talking about something that is not our own problem in a way. So we wanted to be very mindful of that. And in the beginning, it was actually like, we were like, oh God, we can't even talk about it at all. Like we were really, we had to like get over that at first. And so one reason was also to not expose these bodies in any kind of speculative way. And we wanted to keep that a little bit abstract, also keep their ages abstract, and you know who they are, keep that a little bit abstract. So in the installation, these voices that you heard, they're also there, but they're just also audio tracks, and you can wear headphones, and it's kind of optional. There are only two of these headphones, and you can listen to them. And of course, they give the work a full new dimension because they're real people and talk about real things and real life, right? So they're very impactful, but yeah, it's also kind of up to you if you want to listen to, if you want to go that deep with it. Yeah. They were very excited to talk about all this. So they're really very generous people. They've been living with HIV since that time, and so they're in a way survivors, right? Like most of their friends did not make it through that. And so they've dedicated their life really in talking about this time, and they were very excited that, you know, people who didn't live through it were even interested and were like listening to them. And so, yeah, for them, it was very exciting.
I was wondering, I know that I know that conventional treatments for HIV have increased significantly since the times that you were talking about in the presentation, but
I know that's also very expensive, sort of cost prohibitive for a lot of people. And I also would think that the internet would make it easier for people to know about these alternative methods. So I'm sure we don't have clear statistics on this since it is an alternative method, but I was just curious if you had a sense if the prevalence of people using DNCB and other alternative treatments has increased, decreased, or stayed generally the same since the times that you were talking about in the presentation.
Mm-hmm.
So as far as I know, or we know, is that when this kind of free therapy was introduced in the mid-90s,
which is still used today,
that kind of turned everything around for most people, because it was a way to stay symptom free, or like become long-term survivors, basically. That's also what the people we talked to told us. So this kind of experiments and search for different types of alternative treatments mostly were done before that time. So that makes also this project on the research on St. John's wort more confusing, because this is the mid-90s, so that is actually a time where it had already been found this medication that can kind of control what's going on. But still there is no cure, no? There's no way to cure AIDS, and there's also no vaccine. So there's still research to be done, and there's still also awareness to be raised constantly.
And what you mentioned also, of course, the cost of these drugs, right? That's also makes them exclusive to, and certain people do not have access to them. So there's a lot that, AIDS activists are still really fighting for in that field, right? If you look at it internationally, of course, then that's also something that they were all talking about, like that for every community, this is also a different problem, and you have to like talk about it in different ways, and in different countries, it's also very different.
Yeah, so I wanted to talk about the ways in which you're combining what traditionally we kind of call different genre in the installation. So you have what we would call possibly the documentary through the interviews, the experimental through the 16mm, and then the sort of performative / fiction through the video. Right? And in an installation format with sound. So if you could talk about that sort of genre hopping, and what you were trying to accomplish with that.
Yeah, so some of our research that we did was also into looking at films and videos and artwork that was done around that time, around treatment or around, AIDS activism. And so this film by John Grayson, where we showed this tiny clip of Miss HIV, that's, for example, a film from that time. And a lot of the works that we saw in the archives was surprisingly colorful and fun, and had this dark humor, and was really, for our sensibilities nowadays, if you look at contemporary art that addresses health issues and sickness, is much more careful, right? And at the time it's very blunt, it's very satirical, it's really colorful and sexy often, right? And so we were like, we took our clues from that. We wanted to go down that way. That was one reason.
Yeah, and then I think one other reason maybe is to research. I think these maybe different genres are not so divided as they may seem. So I think for example, this kind of 60mm film also has a documentary value, so to say, or kind of us or the group of people enacting these kind of movements of how this could have been done is also maybe some kind of bodily research or documenting also some things, and also it's also bringing research back into the work in different ways instead of like saying this is this and this and this is this and this. So it's maybe gives more information than maybe it so the kind of combination or the assemblage of these things brings up more information than different to keep them separate, so to say.
There's also thinking about like the AIDS movement itself. So there were like these avant-garde artists who, I mean, it's still like this division between film and video artists, kind of, right? And so the avant-garde experimental filmmakers, and then more the video activists who did videos that were art, but they were also treatment newsletters in video form that then they would distribute as VHS, and they were actually kind of activist products just as much as artworks, right? And so you have this kind of more ephemeral practice working with 60 millimeter and like handmade kind of stuff. And then you have these more kind of public speaking video. And we were so fascinated by this clash and wanted to kind of activate that as well. Yeah.
Hi, I really appreciated how you animated the stage as part of your presentation, and you mentioned that earlier, that your lectures are also part of how you deliver the information and you try to open up discourse. So would you talk more? I mean, we came in a little late, so I might have missed some of the animating, but or maybe some explanation, but could you talk more about these elements? And I'm curious what you were painting on the paper, for instance, and thanks.
Sure. Little recap. What we did. Yeah, in the very beginning, we made the tea with St. John's wort tea, which was also used for the processing of the 60 millimeter. And then towards the end, we painted this tea onto this screen. And this is kind of our, this was really an experiment. And we thought of Tony Conrad's Yellow Movie. So that's kind of in this title for this talk. So Tony Conrad did a series of works that he called Yellow Movies that we both really love. And they're paintings. And so he painted like a similar kind of film ratio square on paper. And then inside that square, he painted with white house paint, like wall paint. And he said, so over time, when there's light falling onto this painting, it will turn yellow. It will, just because it's cheap house paint, it won't take that long, maybe a decade, and it'll be yellow. And so this is a yellow movie. This is a movie that, because over time, if you would watch it for 10 years, you would slowly see this fade from white to yellow. So we thought this is perfect for, because we were also mentioning light, experiments with light, and how St. John's wort makes the skin more sensitive to light, and how different therapies use light in combination with St. John's wort to be activated. Yeah, so we were activating this screen with the light then as the final part.
Yeah, and I guess it's also to activate the space of the cinema or the stage, so to say, in a different way, where it's not so confrontational or not so face-to-face, but more like a bit more interactive maybe. And I think it's more to explore is definitely in this kind of light sensitivity of the surface and the substances. That is not just photochemical.
Mm-hmm.
More questions?
Well, one thing that we wanted to mention was that we actually have a publication that we that is very fresh off the printer. We just wanted to show it to you because we're very excited about it. And this is kind of a book with, or like a, yeah, it's not a book. It's like a magazine with all the interviews that we did and like all the research work that we did around DNCB, but also yeah, like in a way replicating the different formats of the installation here in paper form. So please come to the front and have a look at this beautiful product that we're launching today, actually, very first time, international premiere. Yes, right now.
Oh, that's fascinating. Well, what we're dealing here is definitely this, like you guys playing on this very thin line between like science and art. That's, I guess we always kind of, there are questions because science tends to look at things through a very, let's say, very focused lens, right? Like research scientists, they go for the data, like the Robert Koch Institute. People were like, there is no hard data. We are going for the hard data, and if we don't have that, we just don't want to deal with it, right? Artists tends to look at things through like a different lens. It's maybe sometimes things that don't work that could be used for something else. Like there are always the like discoveries sometimes come from failed experiments, kind of things that we can. But I also wanted to say that, like you mentioned that you also encountered somebody in the process while you were doing this who told you about another substance and another. So it seemed like you also that's kind of openness, basically. That's where I kind of want to get that your methodology kind of allows this openness for you to work with. And I guess that's a kind of a very important takeaway for students, I would say. And do you have other works that you would like to like maybe talk about that you kind of think that could be relevant in this context, or what is your kind of approach or methodology when you start to work with things? Maybe that's what would be interesting to share. How do you start with something? What do you look for? What do you do? You do research, you go to an archive.
Yes.
Yeah, I think, I mean, one thing is that I think the experimental is means very different things in different areas, no? So so the scientific experimental is maybe much more results driven or something like that. So, but if you maybe experiment as an artist, you don't often know the result or the outcome of it, you know, or even maybe the process of doing the experiment is more important than what is actually then the result. And actually also we for a very long time did not know the precise shape of what we were doing. But as Oliver said before, like already doing this kind of public encounters was very important in that process, because it kind of also changed how we talked a lot to people, and people, yeah, we had a lot of feedback also.
It's also such a steep learning curve, like talking about AIDS. Oh, wow. That is a lot, right? And so I think it was really through this project that we learned this ourselves, that it's a way to, you can actually start talking about something when you're not an expert yet, right? And it opens up a really good conversation, a really different conversation. And then, so yeah, that was like, so we really learned that ourselves through this work, actually. And yeah, like you say, we visited archives, and then we talked to people who lived through these times and who we already knew. Most of them were already kind of friends or people we knew, but we had never spoken to them in a serious way about that time, right? And that was also a really beautiful process to learn about people that you already know and know about these amazing histories that they went through.
Yeah, because it's historical, but it's recent history, so it's not that.
Yeah.
So people
still know.
know, you know.
Yeah.
It's like. So that was, yeah, it was quite intense, also emotionally because of that, I would say. Of course.
I have a question, even though I had to run and deal with an emergency. Did you get to talk at all about the resonances this work now has in terms of fake science and COVID and?
No, not yet.
No. Sorry to ask the question, but I figure it just needed to be.
Of course, yes.
This idea of the folk remedy and where money's going and the kind of, but even like you just said about this idea, there's such a difference between the amateur artist who's taking a research-based approach, right, versus the kind of person who's selling something without any evidence, right? Like we talk about this idea of the evidence versus, you know, non-evidence based. So do you have thoughts on that? I mean, how is the work really, you've gotten into those conversations? How do you see those resonances yourself?
Well, I think maybe the main issue here is that what you asked before, no, that there's a social aspect, and that at the time, like these people were there, it was like people who were marginalized and who had to organize themselves because nothing was done. So and then a lot of people we spoke to also said they're not against science, you know, it's more, or not, yeah, they're not anti-science or so that's two very important points, I guess.
And that's also why we chose that final quote that Darian says,
yeah,
you know, where she's kind of, this distrust was really good. And that's something to take away from. But she also said science saved me, right? That's what she said. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think what is maybe the most crucial thing to learn from this is that it's the communal aspect of it, that it was like people organizing and being self-organized, and that's actually something that is still important today, or and the actual like questioning science part, I don't think I want to say too much about this.
Yeah, I mean, it did, of course, that context changed so much while we were working on this. Like I said, we've been working on it since 2018. And when we did the first performances, I remember we were like one we did in Vienna, and we were like talking about where does the immune system end? Does it end at the body, or does it end, where does it actually end? And so, of course, like 6 months later, this was like the most boring, normal question that everybody was talking about. But at the time, we were really like, oh yeah, how do we, like, we had to kind of visualize that. We did like some sort of a dance, how to like visualize where does the immune system end, because it was such an abstract idea. And then it became so concrete, right? So yeah, the context has totally changed. But it also, of course, was one of the reasons why this work is now, why it has such a life and it keeps on being shown, because people are, because it's exciting to actually look at what's happening now through compared with then, and look at the differences.
Do you want to talk about writing the book? Did you already talk about it?
No, we didn't talk about it. I pitched it a little bit.
The text in the book is an essay that we wrote or compiled also, and it kind of tells with the story also of our research. And I think for us it was a very helpful thing to do.
It gives space to all the interviews that we couldn't put into the audio track that's in the exhibition, because that's around 10 minutes long. And so here there's much more of the research that we did. And so, it's really great to have this, to give it more space. And actually, like we also mentioned before, this history of DNCB is not written. And so it was also a way to kind of compile all this information that we put together after years, and to have like this, this history of DNCB and what we learned from it, to put that in there.
Mm.
Okay, there aren't any more questions. Okay, well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for the introduction.
Thanks for being here.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks for your questions.